David leaned back on the couch, watching Emily move around their apartment. She was barefoot, her silk robe loosely tied, revealing glimpses of her soft, sun-kissed skin. The dim light made her look ethereal, like something out of a dream. "Come here," he murmured, reaching for her hand. She smiled, stepping between his legs as he wrapped his arms around her waist. His lips found the sensitive spot on her neck, trailing slow, lingering kisses. Emily shivered, her fingers threading through his hair. Their love had always been like this, intense, unfiltered. Even after 5 years of marriage, David still couldn't get enough of her. He pulled her onto his lap, letting his hands roam over her curves. She gasped softly as he pressed his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling. Before things could go further, David's phone buzzed, breaking the moment. He groaned, reluctantly reaching for it. Seeing his boss's name on the screen, he answered. "David, I hope I'm not disturbing your evening." Mr. Richardson's deep voice echoed through the speaker. David exchanged a glance with Emily, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing circles on her thigh. "Not at all, sir. I'd like you and your wife to attend my corporate party this weekend." "But," the older man paused, "I have an interesting proposition." David frowned. "What kind of proposition?" Mr. Richardson chuckled. "I'd like to escort Emily as my date for the evening." David's grip on Emily tightened. He felt her stiffen slightly, before she looked at him with an amused expression. "Are you serious?" David asked, half expecting it to be a joke. "Dead serious. She's a stunning woman, and I'd love to have her on my arm. Strictly for appearances, of course," Richardson added smoothly. David exhaled slowly. His stomach twisted at the idea. But he turned to Emily, searching her face. Her lips curled into a teasing smile, as she trailed a finger down his chest. "What do you think?" he whispered. Emily tilted her head, pretending to consider it. "You trust me, don't you?" Her voice was sultry, her fingers now tracing the line of his jaw. "Of course," he murmured, capturing her lips in a deep, lingering kiss. But even as he lost himself in her taste, the uneasy feeling in his chest refused to fade. Zyada Dana Singh Shan's Our Body Touches Bidalna. The night had finally arrived. David stood by the bedroom door, watching Emily get ready. She slipped into a sleek black dress that hugged her body in all the right places, the fabric smooth and silky against her skin. As she reached for her earrings, David stepped behind her, his hands sliding over her bare shoulders. "You look." He paused, pressing a slow kiss against the curve of her neck. "Dangerously beautiful." Emily smiled, her breath hitching as his lips traveled downward, his hands wrapping around her waist. "David," she whispered, tilting her head as he pulled her closer, his fingers tracing the outline of her dress. "Stay," he murmured, his lips brushing against her ear. "Forget the party." She turned in his arms, cupping his face. "Are you jealous?" Her voice was teasing, but her eyes searched his, looking for the truth. David exhaled slowly, his thumb grazing her lower lip. "Just uneasy." Before he could say more, the sound of a car pulling up outside broke the moment. Mr. Richardson had arrived. Emily smirked, pressing a soft kiss to David's lips. "I'll be back before you know it." He didn't let her go immediately. His kiss deepened, lingering, as if trying to leave a mark on her soul. "Be careful," he murmured. Stepping outside, Emily was greeted by Mr. Richardson, dressed in an expensive black suit, his eyes gleaming as he took her in. "Stunning," he said smoothly, offering his arm. The drive to the venue was filled with light conversation, though Emily felt his lingering gaze on her. "David is a lucky man," he said, a hint of something unreadable in his voice. At the party, the atmosphere was electric, golden chandeliers, live music, and the scent of expensive champagne filled the air. As they entered, Mr. Richardson placed a hand on the small of Emily's back, guiding her through the crowd. "You don't mind, do you?" he asked, his touch light but deliberate. Emily smiled politely, but she could feel the heat of his hand even through the fabric. "I think you enjoy pushing limits," she replied, sipping her drink. He chuckled. "Perhaps." The night had only just begun, and Emily had the distinct feeling that she was being tested. The music thrummed through the elegant hall, casting a warm, golden glow over the sea of well-dressed guests. Emily moved gracefully, her black dress flowing with every step. The scent of expensive cologne and fine wine filled the air as Mr. Richardson guided her to a private lounge area, his hand lingering just a little longer on her waist than necessary. "You truly know how to steal the spotlight," he murmured, pouring them both a drink. Emily took the glass, her fingers lightly brushing his. "And you truly know how to make an entrance," she replied, keeping her voice playful but guarded. Mr. Richardson leaned in slightly, his presence commanding. "Tell me, Emily, does David ever get tired of having a woman as breathtaking as you?" Emily let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "We don't get tired of each other." His eyes darkened, a smirk playing on his lips. "That's rare. Most men forget to appreciate what they have." He reached out, brushing an invisible strand of hair from her shoulder. His touch was featherlight but deliberate. Emily shifted slightly, aware of how close he had gotten. "David is not most men," she said, her voice firm yet polite. Mr. Richardson chuckled, sipping his drink. "That's what I admire about him. He trusts you completely." His fingers trailed the edge of her glass as he studied her. "Do you trust yourself?" The question sent a subtle shiver down her spine. The air between them grew thick, charged. Emily felt the weight of his gaze, the way his fingers hovered near hers, tempting but not quite touching. Meanwhile, miles away, David sat on their bed, staring at his phone. His fingers hovered over Emily's contact, but he didn't press the call button. He told himself he trusted her. He had to. Back at the party, Mr. Richardson moved closer, his voice dropping to a hushed tone. "For tonight, let's pretend you're mine." Emily inhaled sharply, her heartbeat quickening. A part of her was drawn to the thrill of the moment, the danger in his words. But then, as if waking from a dream, she stepped back. "Tempting," she admitted, meeting his gaze. "But I already belong to someone." The moment stretched between them before Mr. Richardson finally smiled, raising his glass. "Smart woman." But something in his eyes told Emily the night wasn't over yet. Emily stepped onto the balcony, the cool night air brushing against her heated skin. She needed a moment to breathe, to clear her head from the intoxicating mix of champagne, music, and the way Mr. Richardson's words lingered in her mind. Reaching into her clutch, she pulled out her phone and dialed David. The call barely rang before he answered. "Emily." His voice was warm, steady, the anchor she needed. She exhaled softly, letting her eyes drift over the city lights. "I miss you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. David chuckled, but there was an edge to it. "Then come home." Before she could respond, she felt a presence behind her. "Mr. Richardson." "Second thoughts," he murmured, standing close, too close. His breath was warm against her shoulder as his fingers brushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Emily's grip on the phone tightened. "I'll see you soon," she whispered to David before ending the call. She turned to face Mr. Richardson, her heart pounding. He studied her, his gaze flickering to her lips, his fingers grazing her arm, leaving a trail of warmth. "You're an interesting woman, Emily," he said, his voice like silk. "Beautiful, intelligent, yet so loyal." She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes. "Is that so surprising?" He smirked, taking her hand in his. His thumb traced slow, deliberate circles against her skin. "A little," he admitted. "Most people are tempted by power, wealth, adventure." Emily swallowed, her pulse quickening as he leaned in, his lips just a breath away from hers. She could feel the heat between them, the dangerous pull of the moment. But then, David's face flashed in her mind. His touch, his voice, the way he loved her completely. Emily stepped back, gently pulling her hand away. "I have everything I need with David." Mr. Richardson's expression shifted, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face before he chuckled. "A rare woman indeed." Emily turned toward the exit, her heart racing. She had been tested, tempted, but love had won. As she stepped into the car that would take her home, she realized something. Trust wasn't just about believing in someone else. It was about knowing yourself. And she knew, without a doubt, that her heart belonged to David. Emily's heart pounded as the car pulled up in front of their home. The moment she stepped inside, she barely had time to close the door before David was there, his eyes searching hers. Relief, longing, and something deeper flickered in his gaze. "You're home," he murmured, stepping closer. She nodded, her lips parting. But before she could say anything, He cupped her face and kissed her. It wasn't just a kiss. It was urgent, filled with everything he had been holding back all night. His hands slid into her hair, pulling her closer as he deepened the kiss, pouring every ounce of emotion into it. Emily melted against him, her fingers tracing the strong lines of his jaw, before slipping down his chest. She could feel the tension in his body, the silent question in his touch. She pulled back slightly, her breath mingling with his. "I only belong to you," she whispered, her fingers tightening around his shirt. David exhaled sharply, pressing his forehead against hers. "I know," he said, but his voice was rough, edged with something raw. His hands skimmed down her arms, gripping her waist, grounding himself in her presence. Emily tilted her head, brushing a slow, lingering kiss against his lips. "You don't have to say anything," she murmured. "Just show me." That was all it took. David lifted her effortlessly, carrying her to the couch. His hands traced the curves of her body, as if needing to remind himself that she was here, with him. He kissed her deeply, his lips exploring every inch of her skin with slow, deliberate devotion. Emily sighed into his touch, threading her fingers through his hair, holding him close. Every kiss, every caress was a silent promise, an unspoken vow that no one, not Mr. Richardson, not the thrill of the unknown, could ever come between them. As the night stretched on, they stayed tangled together, lost in whispered words and soft touches. The world outside faded away. There was only them, their love, their trust, their undeniable connection. And as Emily curled up against David's chest, his arms wrapped securely around her, she knew one thing for certain. Temptation had come and gone, but love, real unwavering love, had won.